Toyota's 2-decade-long game plan appears to be paying off. Interestingly, now you can go to Toyota dealership and buy anything from a Corolla subcompact all the way up to a Sienna minivan with some form of a hybrid electric powertrain. And this is no exception, because for 2021, Toyota is now offering the all-new Highlander hybrid SUV. So let's take a look and see what makes it tick. And the idea of a Highlander hybrid just makes a lot of sense once you start thinking about it a bit more. After all, I reviewed the Toyota RAV4 Hybrid, Toyota's smaller SUV, on this channel before, and it just made, well, a lot of sense. It was practical and spacious and got 40 miles to the gallon, and there really was no compromise with getting a larger, higher riding all-wheel drive vehicle compared to, say, a smaller vehicle people may have been stuck with before this mass proliferation of electrified powertrains. And so applying that same philosophy to the larger 3-row Highlander, yes, there are 3 rows. I fit here and back here.
And even back here, but only just.
And so the appeal of this larger form factor is just hard to deny. Alright, some more Highlander things you should know. Well, there are 2 powertrains you can get. The V6 is standard. That's a 3.5 liter V6, makes 295 horsepower and is very capable. Or for an extra $1,400 you can get this hybrid, and I definitely recommend this is the one to get. Now, you do trade off some peak power. This hybrid has a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder with a hybrid electric battery setup that's good for 243 horsepower. So a bit less power, but the trade-off in fuel economy is, in my opinion, absolutely worth it, because MPG is up over 30% compared to the standard Highlander of EPA ratings of 35 city, 34 freeway, and 35 combined. That's over 12 mpg more than a regular Highlander, and so the cost is offset eventually just by driving it around and saving that much more on fuel. However, and I've argued this before, not having to go to a fuel station nearly as much, this has a practical range of well over 400 miles to a tank, is a luxury in and of itself that does just pay back dividends over time. It's one less thing to think about in your day-to-day commute when your tank of gas lasts 2 to 3 days longer than it otherwise would. Now, of course, with every hybridized or green vehicle, I measure the real-world fuel economy, and I'm happy to report that, interestingly, this has slightly come out ahead of the EPA estimates, returning a real-world figure of 36.5 miles per gallon, which is excellent for a vehicle of this size. And I have to say, I'm not surprised by the stellar MPG numbers. After all, this powertrain is a riff off of what you would find in the smaller RAV4 Hybrid, and in that vehicle, I got over 40 miles to the gallon. And so although Highlander is a much larger vehicle, the thing is, when it comes to big cars being gas guzzlers, it's really accelerating the car up to speed, you know, the 0 to 30 or 0 to 20 where you're using the most gas. But because this is a hybrid, oftentimes the gas engine's actually kicking on until you're going over 20 miles an hour. You know, off the line, it's all EV battery power, and so that sort of bridges that gap and really allows the engine to not work quite as hard, because, you know, once you're sort of just cruising and not accelerating up to speed, the gas engine doesn't work very hard, doesn't use that much fuel. So it makes sense that this is, despite being a much larger vehicle, somewhat close to the RAV4 Hybrid in terms of real-world fuel economy. And this hybrid powertrain, credit where it's due, is smooth as silk. Now, the sound the gasoline engine makes, I've said this before, is a little bit grainy, it's not the nicest noise, but the implementation, the switch over from using pure electric power to the gasoline engine kicking on is so smooth, it's nearly seamless. This powertrain really is so flexible and so great in even larger vehicles like Highlander Hybrid. What is really interesting is the space that Highlander Hybrid occupies. After all, there aren't exactly a ton of 3-row family SUVs with hybrid powertrains available. You can go bigger and get something like the Ford Explorer Hybrid, but that has a base price of 50 grand, and this thing, fully loaded, is 50 grand. And so there's a definite disparity there, because also the Explorer is a larger vehicle. And unsurprisingly, a larger, more luxurious vehicle is not going to get nearly as much MPG in the real world as this thing. Sort of a trade-off there. Well, then you could say, Jake, what about the Kia Sorento Hybrid? And that is absolutely a good point. A direct competitor, in my opinion. I've driven the Sorento. I think it's a very nice option on the market. Similar sizing, you know, a small but just usable 3rd row. The thing is that Kia's hybrid powertrain can eke out a few more MPGs according to the EPA test cycle, but is down considerably on power. And this thing is already not exactly a dynamo in terms of straight line acceleration. So in my opinion, this does kind of represent that sweet spot where it's not going to get the absolute fuel economy of the slightly smaller Kia Sorento, but it's going to get better than the larger Explorer Hybrid, and kind of bridges the gap in terms of price, acceleration, and overall performance. Then, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention two non-hybridized options. That is the Mazda CX-9, which in my opinion is slightly more luxurious than this and has slightly more dynamic drive, but I'm not sure who really cares about dynamic driving in a three-row family SUV, but I have to put it out there. Then there are things with stalwart choices like the Honda Pilot, much more utilitarian, less luxury-oriented, obviously less fuel efficient because there's no hybrid, but its V6 engine is such a sweetheart. So it's kind of cool, depending on the personality you want out of your vehicle, there's kind of an option out there for you. Though I do like the all-roundedness of Highlander Hybrid. And so it's cool to have this flexibility where you do have a larger vehicle. This is much larger footprint than the RAV4 Hybrid, but it can achieve similar fuel economy. And I mean, even if you crunch the math against something like, again, a Chevy Traverse, a non-hybridized three-row option, a fully loaded Traverse is over 55 grand. And so this does seem like excellent value in my opinion, that you can get a fully loaded one for 50 grand, which again, you don't have to, and it'll have heated and ventilated synthetic leather seats, this massive 12-inch screen, and all the real tech you'd want: Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, wireless phone charging, a variety of plugs down here. I'm not wanting for much of anything in this experience. I mean, even credit where it's due, I've knocked on some Toyota products before for having kind of cheap and chintzy interiors, but this all feels great. There's a lot of squish. That's what I look for. If you can really dig your fingernail into the material, it's got some squish in there. That's how you know it's a really nice interior. I like the trim. I like the synthetic leather that they use because it's more eco-minded than real leather. Things like that. JBL audio. This is a nicely equipped vehicle, and I have really nothing to complain about here. Of course, it is my job to nitpick, so I'm going to try and do some nitpicking here. Now, I mentioned before that vehicles like the Mazda CX-9 are much sportier from behind the wheel than this thing, and I don't think that's too important for most people buying these vehicles, but I should note that the ride quality of the Highlander is so soft and comfy, and that makes it like a big marshmallow when you're driving around town. It just soaks up the bumps even on the larger wheels, and it does ride very, very nicely at low speeds. However, and this is something I've experienced with other Toyota vehicles like the Venza before, it seems like once those speeds pick up, the rear shocks or something in the rear suspension can't really keep up, and I have felt this thing kind of bottom out over big expansion joints on the freeway before. Again, it's a total marshmallow overall, but it does become a bit kind of like your grandpa's Cadillac on blown suspension every now and again when you hit the bumps just right at the right speeds. I will say that wind noise in the cabin, which has been something of a common Toyota problem as of late with their newer vehicles, is just more prominent than the competition, especially at speeds over 75 miles an hour, which is funny because Toyota's North American headquarters is based in Texas, and I know for a fact they have 75 and 80 mile an hour speed limits out there. They should know about this. Again, it's not awful, but it is just louder in this cabin when you're cruising on the freeway than some of its competition. The thing is, I'm happy to look past any small faults or foibles with Highlander Hybrid just because as an overall package, it is so good. Like I said at the beginning of this video, Toyota has gone long on electrified powertrains, and it's just paying dividends. Their hybrid tech does just feel years ahead of the competition. So if you're looking for a larger three-row family SUV but don't need something with the absolute utility and towing ability, something huge like a Chevy Tahoe or something like that, then hopping into the Highlander Hybrid is pretty much a no-brainer in my opinion, just because it's so practical, it's so fuel efficient, it feels quite nice, and it's ultimately not that expensive relative to the competition. It's kind of like Toyota's ticked almost every box consumer would ever want for a family SUV and done it with Highlander Hybrid, so good job to Toyota there. And I think that's all I've got for this episode, guys. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Jake. You've been watching Drive, Brake, Fix, Repeat, and I'll see you guys next time where I go do more fun things with cars. Bye.